G3XE here, and good morning. This video is a little bit belated response, but you know, it was Memorial Day weekend and everything. So it's response to response between me and YouTuber J. Scott Garibay, member of the Nerd RP group, I guess. Awesome channel. He has a really good, you know, he's got his head screwed on straight when it comes to D&D. And he also talks about other funny issues in life and whatever. But when it comes to tabletop RPGs, I highly recommend any prospective players or dungeon masters, and all the way to veteran players and dungeon masters, to watch his videos. Very, you know, it's not the same, the business as usual stuff of most D&D content channels, and I found it very, very helpful, so definitely check him out. We are talking about 10-minute combats and achieving them in D&D. D&D is the three pillars of social interaction, exploration, and combat. Those should be equally distributed with time per session. I have out here a sample adventure party. I just grabbed 4 random models. We have a elven dude who may be a warrior. Shouldn't grab him by his head. This piratey guy. Got a shaman of some sort. And then this, I don't know, this woman, she could be anything. She could be a rogue, sorceress, I don't know. And then I also just have a home-built terrain thing of a little cottage, and then this is just from the pet store in the fish aisle. Fish tank stuff are always great for terrain for D&D. So, but yeah, we're talking about 10-minute combats and how to achieve them, streamlining systems so as to get a wider audience to where D&D or RPG should be. Because I think they have a very solid place in the future of entertainment, and I think that entering this new age, like the topic that started this discussion was the next modern RPG, which I definitely think there is going to be, you know, we're going towards that direction. So, I compiled some thoughts in responding to what he had asked me to respond to, and I'd love to, Scott, so I guess I'll go straight into my thoughts. One thought, though, that was just stray was I really do think that apps and social media, but I guess, like, you know, phones, apps, that's going to play a big role in the next modern RPG. I think that having an account that kind of, like, so in the old days, right, you might have a character, and then a character sheet, then you go to a new group, and that group, you know, you get a new player, and they're like, oh, I have this character sheet from my old gaming group. Oh, yeah, I had 10, you know, magic items, and oh, yeah, I was level this, and there's no way to kind of verify that, and generally you go by the rule of don't be a dick, you know, like, which is the presiding rule at my table, right? The unspoken, like, you know, but I think that apps provide a really cool way for people to have a verifiable bank of, like, okay, I made a character, the character's in the little, like, cloud, and kind of D&D 5th edition is going towards this, but to also, like, have that coupled with a really quick system, you know, I think that'd be cool. So that's just a stray thought, but now we're going to get to the actual meat, the mechanics of the game. So, we talked about them in the previous videos, some other ones, so I'm not going to go to those, but I'm going to go down the list. You brought up character states, and I love that. It's such a good idea. Hit points are very, very abstract, so we get rid of the bridge between, okay, well, what does having 40 out of my 60 hit points look like in the story, to just straight up saying them. I think you had 4. I actually think that 5 is a better number, if only because then there's an absolute middle, and I just think that's a good gauge. 5 just feels aesthetically more pleasing on a piece of paper to me. I like to have 5 words in a row. But I do like Hale as the top, and I was or not the top, but where the characters start out, and I was thinking maybe potentially if you thought it cool, you could add in inspired or something simpler above that as a temporary condition that you could get as a bonus. So like you're Hale almost always when you're healthy. Like after a long rest, you'd be Hale. But then maybe certain characters get abilities where you can get your party members to be inspired. Same way evil villains could inspire their lower level minions, their drudge type characters. And it'll give you some sort of bonus when you're currently inspired. I love Hale. I think that's great for a fantasy setting. Just feels cool. You were talking about Daunted for being in between Hale and Wounded, which I really like. Although Daunted to me feels, it's more like you're saying, if you mean that to be a mental state, then Daunted is the word. A kind of physical version of Daunted in my mind is Battered. Like you are battered or beaten, but you are still fighting, right? So with the 5 that I'm proposing, which are just your 4 with the Inspired tacked on, Battered would be the middle. Battered or Daunted. Really, it could be either one. It just depends if you are meaning mentally or physically, shaken. Wounded, perfect. And then Dead is the last one. I think you could also go with calling it Incapacitated, because that could also allow you to it allows you to have people being knocked out, which in my stories happens a lot because we're very casual gamers, and unless someone's getting crushed by a boulder or sliced in half by a demon prince, usually people get knocked out in my game. It doesn't happen that often, but you know what I mean. Like, Dead could be within incapacitated though, so you could also become incapacitated and then make the equivalent of a death save or whatever, or it could just be depending on the certain circumstances. And you could also find a different word, but it would allow for that kind of like you are on the ground needing assistance, medical assistance, and you're not participating in the battle anymore, but you're not dead. So anyway, that's my thoughts on states. I love that idea, and I'll probably be incorporating that into my games as well. Alright, you brought up the idea of drudge, veteran, and elite things, and I love that. I would actually say that the next modern RPG, if we have those streamlined stats, the crunchy stats, would have built into it a monster creation system, right? A simple one. But for instance, like I saw in your Nerdarchy thing, the Bark Ragers, like that was really cool. I might use those in my game as well. It would be cool if you could do that very quickly and easily within the system. And I think Drudge having specific mechanical differences between a Drudge, a Veteran, and an Elite would definitely play into that. So I think that'd be really cool. Because if you wanted to, you have an idea of a monster in your mind, and then all you have to do is assign it. Well, I think it would be a Veteran, and I think it would have this combat, this range, this spell attack, and I think it would have a breaking point of this. And then you're done with the mechanic side of creating that monster, right? So I really like that. I was thinking that in a cool way that, and obviously more about how these mechanics would interact, but to my mind, when you mentioned those two, states and then having those Drudge, Veteran, Elite, I automatically thought of was that, a Drudge character would flee. Its breaking point would be as soon as it's daunted or as soon as it's battered, right? Like they're out of there. A veteran's breaking point might be when they're wounded because they want to stay alive, but they're going to fight more. And then elites are going to fight to the death, or some version of that they're in. But I think those two mechanics play in really, really well. So I really like that. Then 2 points that I would say that I would really love to be, but I would, in the next modern RPG, I haven't fleshed them out as much as I did the 10-minute combat thing, but One of them is fairly simple. That is experience and leveling. With the combat system that we discussed, it kind of gets rid of the need for levels. And also having Drudge, Veteran, Elite kind of gives you an idea for how strong something is without needing numbers. But that then goes into, well, how do characters progress and get better? I don't know why more RPGs don't do it this way, where the Skyrim method or the Oblivion or Elder Scrolls method, if you've played any of those games, you get better at things by doing them, which is how it works in the real world, right? You can't... in D&D right now, you can spend an entire night killing hordes of orcs with your 2 swords, and then you level up, and then you gain a power to... or, you gain a proficiency in cobblestone making or something, I think that experience should be awarded at the end of sessions. At the end of sessions, and everyone gets, like, what the equivalent of a +1 would be to whatever stat or whatever skill, however it works within the system, they use the most. So, if I used a one-handed hammer and beat a bunch of orcs all day, then at the end of that session, you get a +1 to your one-hand weapon skill or your hammer weapon skill, or +1 to your combat value when wielding a one-handed hammer. Something like that, right? So it's, I think, DM discretion as to what the person used the most, and if it's kind of iffy, like, well, I kind of half the time did this, half the time did that, then you let the player decide. And I think that really, one, it gives players a reason to come to sessions and immediate gratification. I think that's a big part of, like, at a movie, it's done, you have something at the end, there's a resolution, and at D&D games, often it's like, well, we didn't get to the final boss of the session, and it's been 3 hours, and we gotta leave, so everyone's like, okay, well, I guess we'll pick up here. Whereas they all automatically know, no matter what, at the end of the session, my character's going to get, like, a +1 to whatever they spent their time doing. And it also gives it's a mechanic that not forces, but gently nudges people towards role-playing their characters. Because if your character's good at something, and you just rely on that one good thing, you're not going to expand who your character is. And if you're a barbarian type who always intimidates, then you're never going to get better at talking to people. Now, if you try and learn it, try and get more successes, then you could get better at that as well, and it allows it to get a well-rounded character. It allows people to role-play who their character is. Maybe you want to specifically just be really, really good at this. Those mechanics would allow you to do that. So I think session-based rewards based on what skills you use during that session would be easier than the leveling system, easier than keeping track of experience points and leveling, and would also make more role-playing sense. Finally, my last point, I would like that the next modern RPG have a magic creation system, similar to a monster creation system. I think that spell lists and a book of spells is always clunky, rewards people who are willing to just like rule lawyer type memorize the spells rather than people who have a creative idea about problem solving. I think that magic should be the tool for the creative problem solver, not the tool for the rules lawyer type thing. Because right now, if you have a cool DM and you're like, well, I want to cast this spell, but I want it to do this specific thing, which it doesn't really say in the spell book, DMs will be like, all right, well, that might add one harder DC or something, but yeah, go ahead. Like, I think that spells should be able to be quickly crafted, and like quickly, like if I think of a spell on the spot, the system should have a thing for telling you how hard it is to cast and what its effects are in a very role-play heavy, mechanical light details. So you don't have to specify, well, this magical cone goes out in a radius of 5 feet, and every creature within the 5 feet has to take a save of Constitution. Like, that stuff, like I've been harping on, the DM can handle, right? If a monster gets sprayed with fire, I know how to do that, right? I roll, depending on the circumstances. What I would like all the effort to be put into is giving the players the ability to create whatever spell they can, and then assign it a fair difficulty class and fair skill requirement. So built into it needs to be something where a player can't say, I want to cast a spell that destroys the entire universe. If, like, it should be able to be done technically, but then within the rules of spell making, it would be such a DC that it might be impossible, right? It would be, unless you were creating a specific, as a DM, you were creating a monster with that ability, then it'd be impossible, right? At the same time, I don't think, with small spells, I think wizards should be able to just create stuff. And that gets people role-playing as wizards, thinking, okay, well, what if I combine the, and one way, I do not, this is very hard to visualize mechanically, like, I don't, it is a hard game designing task. The one way I was thinking about one could go about it is through, like, keywords, but use, like, magical runes or magical terms, right? So, like, the keyword of fire, if a spell gets that, it adds a certain bit of difficulty and whatever. If a spell gets the keyword of, travel, right? So there's a whole magical language, and so then it gets people thinking in that thing, saying, okay, well, I want so a cast a fireball spell might be combining the keywords of fire and travel, right? So I make fire and I travel it over there, and stuff like that. So I just think that it would get it's almost like, I think it should be like coding, which you should probably know a whole bunch about. So you probably would be better suited to creating it, but. The magic system should not be a list of programs. It should be a simple programming language, kind of like TI-84 calculators. Like, that's the extent of my programming background. But as soon as I learned that you can make it do all the calculations for you in my math class, I was like, okay, well, that's the homework done. Just do the process over and over. And that program was just written because I knew some simple components. So it would allow people to problem solve, I've rambled on about it for long enough, but I think you get my meaning. It would be very difficult to do game design-wise, but I wouldn't let fear of it being... fear of people finding loopholes within it stop it from being fun and roleplay-y, because people are always going to find ways to abuse spells. Might as well put in stuff so that everyday normal type people can jump in and they don't have to start flipping through spells like each spell is for a new player. Like, I had a girl, a friend of mine and his girlfriend come to play for a one-off session. Never played D&D before. They were interested in it. I knew them from a club completely unrelated to gaming of any kind. And but I knew them to be very cool people, so I was like, "Oh yeah, come on over. We'll hang out, throw some dice." And then I was gonna pre-make characters for them, and I eventually, I didn't want to, as a DM, I didn't want to really force them to play a specific character, but then you have to walk that line because they didn't know anything about the system, and I wanted, I had this little mouseling wizard model, and the girl, I knew she had this really cute hamster that, she really liked. And so I wanted to make that her character, and I asked her, I was like, can I make him, but he's like a little wizard, and she's like, oh, super excited about it. And then I'm like, well, what spells do you want to take? And I show her the things, and she's like, you just choose. Because, for a new player not knowing anything about it, the spell book is like, the names sound cool, I don't know what any of this means, but if you had a simple way for people to understand how to make up their own spells, and then the DM would tell them, okay, well, that means that you need this to cast it, or something like that, then that would allow her to be able to be like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I can do whatever I want, essentially. Now, I think that melee fighters and whatever shouldn't be left out. I think that's the beauty of the combat value overall, is that if you describe it, you can do it. So if a guy wants to learn a super cool technique with a sword and he wants to describe that specifically, you can roll that, add your combat, and give him whatever bonus you want, because that's an awesome description and an awesome move. So you can see where I'm going with that. Anyway, hail, or inspired, you don't start there, but you could be inspired. Then hail, maybe daunted or battered, wounded, incapacitated, perhaps, as states. I love Drudge, Veteran, and Elite. I think that those play nicely with a monster creation type mechanic. I think that experience rewarded character growth should be at the end of each session and should be a plus to whatever thing the person used the most during that session. And I think that, and this is the hardest one, there should be a magic system that is just the structure of how to create your own spells and assign them a difficulty class to cast, essentially, in D&D terms, so that people can use magic as wizards would and create their own spells. And then they get to have the fun of naming them and have their own spell book where they're like, that character I was talking about, her hamster was called Butter, and that's what the magician was called. So she could make up a spell called, like, Butter's hamster wheel, and it creates a force ball around the enemy, and they're trapped in this little, or not hamster wheel, hamster ball or whatever. So I just think that's so much cooler, and than, a list of just, like, in section 4 of the blah 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 spell, when cast as a 4th level spell, does this. And it's like, that's why people say, oh, new players shouldn't play wizards, because they won't know what the hell's going on. And it's like, no, they should be able to play whatever they want. And in fact, wizards, I think, should be the best class for new players, because it'll get them thinking in the problem-solving mindset of, oh, I can cast whatever spell I want. It's up to my creativity. So it's like, they're like, well, how do I kill this knight? He's fully armored. Then, it rewards the player who's, like, thinking on their feet enough to be like, well, I could electrocute the heavy armor, the metal armor, and, like, shock him inside, or, unfortunately, it would probably bring out some more sadist of us, right? The more like, ooh, I'm now gone mad with power. But I think it would be very fun, and I think those are my thoughts. I think that awesome. If you release your RPG, I will definitely pick up a copy, and I hope that we continue this build-up of game mechanics, because I love it. So, thanks. See you in the next.